Good afternoon, members and ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is taking place in the Sparkenhoe Committee Room at County Hall, Glenfield, though some officers will be joining us online via Microsoft Teams. This meeting is being webcast live to the public on YouTube. Please turn your microphones on when you're speaking and off when they have finished. Right, sorry, when you have finished. Right, agenda item 1 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of January 2022, and I propose those minutes of that meeting are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are we agreed? Thank you. Question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5, and I have received no items on that. 4, to advise of any other items which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda, and there are no urgent items. And 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on this agenda. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda for this meeting, but I am assuming that all members who are members of district councils will wish to declare a registrable interest in relation to agenda item 8 on the Leicestershire Resources and Waste Strategy public consultation, and so I take that as read. Are there any other? No, thank you. 6, declarations of the party whip in accordance with overview and scrutiny procedures rule 16. Are there any declarations of the party whip? Thank you. And 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35, and I haven't received any such petitions. So, agenda item 8, our first substantive item, is the Leicestershire Resources and Waste Strategy public consultation as set out on pages 11 to 312 of your agenda pack. Now, Joanna Guile, Assistant Director, Environment and Waste, will introduce this item, unless, Anne, you wish to say anything at this point as Director. No? Okay, Joanna, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd take us through it page by page. I'm only kidding. I won't be doing that. Thanks, Chair. I think really I'm just going to try and do a whistle-stop tour and then I'll hand over to yourselves for any questions. The purpose of the report is to seek views from the committee on the Leicestershire Waste Partnerships draft resources and waste strategy, which sets out how we hope municipal waste will be managed up to 2050. This is all happening during an active, live, Cabinet-approved 12-week public consultation period, which started at the end of January of this year. If we look at the report, then, it sets out some history, including who the Waste Partnership is, why in a 2-tier area the partnership, the authorities are required to have a joint waste strategy in place. It gives some historic documents and timelines for past reviews that date back to, I think, 2002, as well as how this new document will align with other, in our case, County Council key policies such as the environment strategy. In the background of the report, we summarise the national position linked to the government's release of its National Resources and Waste Strategy in 2018, which also covers the period up to 2050 and aims to reduce single-use plastic, cut confusion, I think, for everyone on recycling, tackle packaging, the problem of single-use packaging generally, and end food waste. It also wants to make the UK more resource efficient and move to a circular economy, and some of those things are explained in the report. In terms of the documents that we've released for consultation, they're listed at point 14 in your report. And some of those are very technical, but there are also hopefully a number of summary documents within there. As I said, if we look at the draft strategy itself, it covers the period up to 2050, so mirrors that national position and includes a vision, which is outlined in point 15. There are some strategy objectives, and they're not listed in the covering report, but they are in Appendix D. And then there is a range of pledges which are covered from point 17, and hopefully certainly things that you'd expect to see in there, things like waste prevention, reuse. There are pledges around introducing separate food waste collections, garden waste collections. And on the garden waste collections, we're waiting on some government advice around whether that their ambitions are for that to be a free service or whether it will continue to allow for charged for services. There's elements around moving towards a consistent suite of recycled materials. There's it covers things around contributing and having a system that contributes to the national 65% recycling target by 2035. And maybe more specifically for the county council, there is a pledge, I think it's the last one, around reducing waste to landfill to less than 5%. So the pledges try and give, in essence, the sort of summation of what the strategy is aspiring to do. It then moves on to the options appraisal, and the partnership have modelled 9 options, and they're from 19 in the report. But if I just sort of summarise them, they certainly try to mirror what government is proposing across a core set of options, which I've just touched on. There is an acknowledgement, I think, that if and when partners collectively look to introduce any of these measures going forward, it will involve increased cost, a cost uplift on where we are with services at the moment. And all of those options have been modelled for carbon impacts. And then some wider qualitative judgments have been introduced as well. So things like public acceptability. So those criteria have been assessed. And again, they're covered in the report, those criteria and weighting. So the results are covered, I think, in point 25 of the report. And I think, in essence, the best, if there's such a thing, the highest performing collective option is what we're calling option 5A. And I won't go through it verbatim, but it kind of takes where we are at the moment, but includes consistent suite of recycled materials, free garden waste collections for all districts, separate weekly food collections, covers some of the national measures around extended producer responsibility and deposit return schemes coming into effect, and those are explained in the report. So and includes some restriction on your residual waste bin, so a 2 fortnightly collection of a 140 litre bin. So it's a whole scale change over time. There's a lot of amendments and ambition in there to replicate what the government's been proposing. So that's option 5A. And if I just then move on to the fact that we also have to, as part of the process, produce a strategic environmental assessment. It's a mandatory part of the review process. So we've commenced that, and that includes seeking views from some of the statutory consultees like the Environment Agency and others. It's arguably quite a technical part of the consultation, but there is a non-technical summary in that environment report. And again, that's included in the consultation documents that are out there at the moment. If I just finish off then, in terms of the live consultation period that we're in, it's due to close on the 25th of April. The County Council has made available the questionnaire to the public on its Have Your Say website, and the district partners have been doing something similar on their own websites. There are 24 questions, but we've also used other media channels, Twitter, Facebook, other things, and any comments that we're receiving, those will be incorporated into the feedback that we take on board as part of trying to finalise this review and produce the final documents. We're also doing a range of targeted comms, and I think there's a Leicestershire Matters article planned for some time this month, just to sort of reiterate the opportunity for people to take part and comment. All of those findings and feedback will be used to inform the final strategy, as I've mentioned, and our hope is to be able to go back to Cabinet in late summer, early autumn, allowing for feedback that we get today. And I think I probably should just mention resourcing as well. In terms of the consultation process itself, it's funded from a partnership fund that's already set aside, so that is already covered financially. And in terms of the I think I've already mentioned there's a cost uplift as we move forward with some of these proposals. So it will involve financial implications for all the partners potentially. But I'd probably add that we are also waiting on some feedback from central government around, they've stated some commitments to fund sort of any new burdens placed on local authorities, and we're hoping to get some early feedback from them actually this month. So as part of this consultation, we will certainly take all of that on board. And I think with that, I'll pause and I'll stop, and happy to take questions. But I think it's just to reiterate, this is a really valuable opportunity for officers to sort of get views from this scrutiny committee. And I should introduce, I've got Vicky Comey also in committee online. She's been sort of leading for the County Council's part on sort of the more technical aspects and some of the workshops that have taken place. So if members have any specific questions, I might draw Vicky in just to help answer those. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Vicky. And again, just to underline the fact that this is a report we've had to produce, and we've produced it in conjunction with our district and borough partners, who have all had massive input into this. They're the collection authority, we're the disposal authority, and that's where we're joined up at this point. Remember the uplifts that are proposed, we think, by national government. So just bear all that in mind, and may I have comments or questions on this? Mrs. Hack.
Thank you, Chair. I know the paper's incredibly interesting, and I read the lot. You know, real detail that has gone behind putting this strategy together. I do have a few questions, if I may. First, on the household waste recycling percentages. So in my division, where my division is in Blaby District Council, and there has been a whole host of different changes to bins that were implemented in June 2018, but we haven't seen any recycling rate improvement since then. What incentives, what support is given? How do the authorities work together to improve recycling in local communities? Because certainly changing round of bins hasn't been successful so far in Blaby. So what education goes in to encourage people to recycle? Secondly, there's little mention through the documentation about fly tipping, and obviously that does form part of the structure of how waste is received, but also that educational piece about fly tipping. It's notoriously expensive to clean up. Quite often the police have to get involved because roads are blocked, that kind of thing. So any enhancement of that would be great. And I noted in the paper that only 2 of the district councils have litter strategies, and whether or not there was any view to push that forward in this strategy to make sure there was a consistent methodology, not just in collection, but in how litter was managed, not just at district level, but obviously county are responsible for looking after our highways land too. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to bear in mind that some of the issues that Mrs. Hack has referred to are the district and borough collection authorities' responsibility, not particularly ours at county, but it does have a general washover, of course. So I wonder if the officers do particularly want to mention anything pertinent for that, particularly fly tipping.
Chair, do you want me to just come back initially? And I certainly don't know if Vicky will add anything linked to any of the debates that have happened. But if I pick up fly tipping first, perhaps I think some really valuable feedback, and looking at some of the consultation responses that we've had in so far from the public, I think it's consistent with it's a concern for residents. It's a really complicated thing, the issues that contribute to and cause fly tipping. That said, I think it's arguably what Scrutiny are asking, and I think what certainly the public was starting to see is that they would like maybe that covered more extensively, or a section covered on that within the final strategy when we produce it. So with agreement, we'll take that point away and look to how we build some of that in so that it's more clearly addressed. The litter strategy point, I think, again, we could take that back certainly from our collection authority colleagues for them to consider, whether there's an opportunity for them to collaborate around a consistent approach to sort of litter as an issue across the county for them as collection authorities, as it's less something for ourselves as the disposal authority. And maybe the last one on incentives and support. We certainly have plateaued as a partnership on performance. I think that the proposals that you can see in the options that we've modelled, they touch on this thing that I mentioned almost at the end, that we're waiting on some further feedback, hopefully soon, from government around a link to their second consultation that they carried out, and this point about no new financial burdens. I think the collection authorities, and I can't speak for them, but would acknowledge that to improve performance, it's probably twofold. You need further services or enhancements to existing things like the weekly food waste. You need to move it out of residual waste, and to do that, that involves a further collection infrastructure, and that costs money. But government are proposing to cover that cost, so that would enhance performance. So it's a sort of practical hard measure. So we'd like some feedback from central government on that. But the other is probably around, maybe we should take from Scrutiny a commitment to explore broader, stronger communications plans and education. I can speak for the County Council. We have a budget, and we do throughout the year a series of initiatives and work around communications and education. But we could take that back and challenge the partnership about whether it's in a position to look in the future to invest and do more across the county area. Thank you.
Mrs. Hack?
Yeah, can I just come back? I mean, interestingly, on the litter strategy, I mean, there's a lot that's said about this is district, this is county, but on litter, we did get involved in the litter arena because we provided a huge investment in the litter wombles. You know, certainly, you know, a good thing to do, but I think for me is if we are actually looking at something consistent across the districts and the county, having a view of how we will manage litter across Leicestershire, I think is a really important one. I also think, you know, this is a strategy that's come to us as the, you know, as the strategic authority of which the districts are partners. So I think it's really important that we do have a view at county about fly tipping, even though it's the district's responsibility to clear it up, because what the public will say and what the public have said all the way through COVID, and I think, you know, rightly or wrongly, is, well, you shut the tips aren't open, you create it. I don't necessarily believe that view, but I think it's a view that's out there. So actually having a response to that, I think, is an important one. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Hacken. I will say that I did look, when I was lead member, at the correlation between fly tipping and our closing of tips when we had to because of the pandemic, and there was no correlation. But the perception is exactly the opposite, and it's promulgated often by the media, and I think education is the right thing here to do. You're quite right. Did you want to pick anything else up there, Joe, or shall I move on? I have 2 or 3 questions here as well when you're ready.
No, I'm happy, Chair. I'll certainly take all of that away to the partnership. Thank you.
Mr. Frisbee first.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back historically, as a child, we were part of the Keep Britain Tidy campaign of the 70s and 80s, perhaps disclosing my age a little bit there. Is there a desire in principle that issues around littering might be introduced or embedded in education, or are we doing anything in schools to perhaps revigorate or revisit that? It was certainly drummed into us as children, the importance of maintaining our environment. Is there a strategy, or we've got an intention of putting in a strategy or encouraging the schools to actually do a little bit more at an educational level? Thank you.
I think we would all agree that that's a very useful thing. I think the younger individuals in our society really are so keen. I've seen them, and they really are a force to harness. And I think that going there again will be useful. So I would like to second that, and we go with that. Lead members just flagging as well. If you wait, Mrs. Hack.
Chairman, I'm quite happy to answer some of these points at the end, but some good news on what we do to support education and theatre and children around recycling and waste prevention. So I'll come back to that.
Okay. Rosita?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points for information from my perspective, please, first before I ask my question. But going backwards, I recall not only going around the schools, but I think Councillor Payne used to go even around the schools educating, and we did that quite well. But it has to be a continual process, because the public will not adhere to being responsible. They expect us to do everything. And whilst I agree with Councillor Hack that there is a great expectation, I see them day in and day out throwing litters out of car windows. And I find that quite disgraceful, because we pick litter on a regular basis. We have the Wombles, and when I go in the morning to check on our officers, and I go back in the afternoon, and it's back there. Now, at Harbour District Council, we are quite proud of our achievement. We are down a third on our littering, and that is due not only to education, but it is down to enforcement. We've put overt cameras in, and we actually hand out stiff penalties. And I think that is one thing we all should do, to pick out the culprits and to punish. In relation to food waste, we've done it at Harbour. It didn't work. It cost us a great deal of money, and I'm very reluctant to any promises the government makes, because they always promise us money in the first place, then they withdraw it, and we are stuck with it.
And your question, Mrs.
My
Page?
question, I get to that. First of all, batteries. Now, I know from when I'm doing this job, and only recently, batteries, small electrical goods, they tend to set fire in bins and whatever else. Now, people will still throw them in, the same as Councillor Frisbee mentioned paint at our last meeting. Now, why don't we look at providing this caddy in our bins, where we can put these hazardous items separately, rather than expecting people to go into supermarket where they're overflowing, and, you know, people putting them in the bottom of the bin in blankets. Now, my most important question is, I'd like to know what we are going to do with the outcome of the consultation and the value of this strategy in case the government changes their mind. So if the government brings a white paper out, do we still go ahead with all of this? Does this underpin our individual strategies and whatever else? So just talk me around that, how we're using the strategy and the consultation to the best of our advantage going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if I could just, I don't want to be partisan in a district and borough level, but I will just say that my own borough and that district, that is Northwest, does actually collect batteries. You just put them in a plastic bag and put them out. It's a simple collection thing, and there is the facility.
Thank you. I'll come in first, and then perhaps Joe or Vicky can add to it. Just firstly, your comments on communication campaigns, absolutely agree. It's got to be, you know, consistent, and you've got to continually do it. I think more recently we've been working with district partners around, or the districts have been working on communications around littering from cars, you know, and I think that was one particular example you had. But equally, you know, you need messages in schools, etc. It's got to be an ongoing thing. And again, I wholeheartedly agree, that has got to be backed up with enforcement campaigns. And as you're rightly saying, you know, Harbour have been relatively successful more recently on doing that. In terms of batteries, you know, as you pointed out, the chairs pointed out, some authorities are Northwest do that at the moment. We collect them at the RHWS. You know, the rules and regs are, you know, outlets over a certain size have to have those facilities for recycling. And on option 3, one of those 9 options that we're consulting on, under the sensitivity test, it does include looking at batteries being collected curbside, and the way the chair has said there. I'll just hand over to Joe or Vicky in case you want to add anything further.
I think Vicky and I had a standoff there about I'm going to let Vicky come in if she thinks there's anything around some of the things. I know we've done some stuff with schools, but before she does, there's quite a lot educationally from the county council's perspective. Just coming back on the sort of the last question, what we'll do, what will be the outcome of the consultation? Obviously, we'll absolutely take on board all of the comments from Scrutiny today. And I've already mentioned, the public consultation, which is live, and those wider comments and sort of qualitative and quantitative results. And all of that will go into hopefully enhancing the final version that we take forward. The pledges, I think, are the best way I can give an example of how there is obviously some nervousness that recognises that governments change, positions and policies move and shift. I don't think it's in question that in a two-tier area, as the chair set out those roles and responsibilities, I don't think it's in question that we need a collaborative approach to how we manage waste going forward. And this document will allow for that. So I think it's still required, in spite of or regardless of whether all of the measures that government are proposing come to fruition. But if I give the example of the pledges, hopefully they are worded in such a way to acknowledge the nervousness around funding. The government intimated it will supply funding for some of these big measures, and we are reflecting that in, should the government commit to it, with that financial support, we would look to introduce it in the timeframes that they've set out. But I think, hence the point that we're waiting on some feedback and some of those confirmations of next steps. I absolutely think something will happen from a personal perspective. There are things like extended producer responsibility, which looks to industry to invest in sort of tidying up the packaging that we are left with at the end of the line. I think those things will happen. So what waste looks like and its composition will change anyway. So I do think there are opportunities in this strategy anyway. And sorry, Vicky, I talked across the top of you if you wanted to add anything around some of the sort of educational stuff.
No, I think most of it's been covered, but just really to agree with the point that's been made that absolutely all of this needs to be supported by a commitment to ongoing engagement with the public, and that includes through schools. Although they weren't quite scored in the same way, you can see in the report that option 1 is exactly that. It is a focus on waste awareness and education and recycling and prevention initiatives. So that is absolutely something that all the partners are committed to carrying on, because it you can put in these measures, but really they won't work unless we engage with people and they know what they're being asked to do and why.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Joe. Right, well, that's our firm recommendation. I think that educationally we do need to underline that as well. And final comments now from the lead member.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to come back and just touch upon some of the comments that have been made. But before I do so, I just wanted to stress, as you have done and as the officers have done, this is quite an important strategy that we're debating at the moment. And I'd encourage not only every member, but members of the public that take a keen interest in waste prevention and disposal of waste or waste processing more generally. This quite possibly will have some stark changes to behaviour. It will drive change to behaviour, and it's important that people are aware that the consultation is going on, and like I say, encourage people to engage in that consultation. Just on the points that have been made, we'll start with Rosita, and she makes a good point about whether the government would change their mind, etc. I'm no expert in this, but the Environment Bill received royal assent last year. And again, that's going to have a profound impact on how we discharge our environmental obligations, not as a public authority, but as an economy moving forward. But I suspect the challenge for us is not necessarily to preempt what changes the government might make, because there's an act of parliament there that's already prescriptive in terms of the objectives they want to achieve. And they'll do that through what they call secondary legislation and statutory instruments. At any point in time, they will trigger the provisions within the act. So we need to have overarching strategies here more locally that can accommodate if they are to go in a certain direction collection and use a bit of secondary legislation, that we can actually deliver what the law expects us to deliver. So I think it's important that whatever strategy we accept, it has that flexibility in it to try and deal with the provisions within the Environment Act moving forward. In terms of Amanda's points, and they're all very, very fair points. We are a strategic authority, but sometimes I think there's a misconception that we're the parent of our district and borough colleagues. We're not. They are separate legal authorities in their own right, and we have to work with them, and they have professional qualified staff at those particular organisations that work with our professional qualified staff, and they have to work through the laws and the processes that we're expected to discharge locally and come up with some kind of framework that they can put before members of the public. So it's not a matter of us forcing upon our colleagues or our district partners what we want to see. Truly, this is collaborative partnership working, and we have a strategy here that every single district and borough, and Leicester City as an associate member of that partnership, has contributed towards. And I suspect if there are issues to do with the collection side of the strategy, they need to be taken up with the respective collection authorities and the officers at those authorities, and indeed the members, when considering this overarching strategy. What I will say, recycling performance, we work very, very hard at our communications and working with district and borough councils and private organisations to try and ram home the messages about recycling and reuse and all that. And you'll see on our Leicestershire Matters, I think the one that's about to go out, there's a whole back page spread once again reminding people how best to recycle. I think from my perspective, and from what I've been briefed, the problem really is contamination. Performance, I'm not sure what necessarily is driving a stagnation of performance at best, and I suspect it is because of all the disparate ways we collect across the county, and not least we're off the back of a pandemic, so human behaviour is very different. But contamination is key. So, for instance, people could be recycling in good faith, but if they put some contaminated container in their recycling with food, that could sabotage a whole batch of recycling at the process end, at the plant end, which means ultimately, whilst we might be collecting good quality recyclate, some of the contamination means there's less recycling actually moving forward. So we have some work to do in terms of communicating messages around contamination, because that's really important. Fly tipping, again, it's something that comes up year after year after year, but I'll make 2 points. One, we're not immune from the costs of fly tipping as a county council. We still have to cover the financial costs of disposing of fly tip waste. So the collection authorities might well be the enforcement authorities for fly tipping, and it might be their responsibility to catch and bring to justice perpetrators of this crime. But we still, as a county council, have the financial cost of disposing of that waste. So it is in our joint interest to work together, and we do. But as Rosita Page, Councillor Page, just said, there is a very strong correlation between those authorities in Leicestershire that enforce their policies and those that don't. And Harbour's doing brilliantly through their tip-off campaign at the moment. And fly tipping, if I'm not mistaken, is actually statistically coming down in the Harbour district, because they're treating very seriously the enforcement side and the prosecution side to the perpetrators of fly tipping. If more authorities focused in on that, I'm pretty sure the big stick would have an impact on the amount of fly tipping across the county. And again, similarly on litter strategy, I accept during the pandemic, through the community grant scheme, the leader authorised a substantial award to communities and the Wombles, but predominantly it is a function of the borough and district councils, which of course we work with our partners to deal with the strategies regarding litter, but predominantly it is a responsibility of the borough and district councils to focus in on that, and I wouldn't want to steal members at borough and district councils' thunder in terms of what they decide to do there. So with that. Oh, finally, education, Councillor Frisbee. Yes, keep Britain tidy and schools. Well, I have some great news here. We do routinely, through the budgets, engage with schools, particularly around recycling education. And at the moment, as we speak, we have a theatre group called Gazebo Productions that are going in and out of the schools throughout Leicestershire, and their workshop brings the Flingertrons, which are time travellers from the future who refuse to recycle, and they bring them to life, and this inspires children to play their part in saving the planet from climate change. But we also package that with general waste prevention messages. So this is something we do year after year after year, and a couple of years ago I did an East Midlands TV piece about this too. So I'm very supportive of educating young people, because if we can catch young people at that age, hopefully as they grow up and become adults, they'll be far more aware about the impacts upon our environment and waste prevention more generally.
Well, thank you for those final heartwarming comments, and good luck, lead member, with your flingatrons. Sorry, I thought we. Okay, very quickly, Mrs. Forgive me, Mrs. Hack.
No, not at all. No, it was just something I'd forgotten on the first thing, but also to provide Councillor Frisbee with, there is a syndicate group off the South Leicestershire Litter Wombles, and it would be remiss of me not to say, because the key volunteer lives in my patch, and they've been going around schools, quite a few a month, to talk to young people about litter picking and stuff. But the question really was about uniformity, and whilst I understand the districts have come together under this banner, there is still quite a lot of different strategies in place. How confident are we that this strategy will look at more uniformity? Because Blake's right, contamination is one thing, but actually in Leicestershire, that some of the key issues we've got in terms of the educational message is recycling is a bit different in each area. So actually putting out a Leicestershire message is very, very difficult. How will we get to uniformity, and how far away do we think that is?
Okay. Like
my view, very quickly, by accepting, obviously this strategy has to go through a public consultation, but what each borough and district council and organisation has signed up to within the strategy, by using that as a uniform blueprint by which to conduct our business, that is the way we get a uniformity across the county. So let this go through a public consultation. Let's respond to the public opinion, because that's what we have a duty to do. And then hopefully once we've adopted this strategy across Leicestershire, including the borough and district councils, hopefully we'll see a degree of uniformity as to how we go about our business.
All right, thank you, members, very much for your contributions on that part of the agenda. I welcome Mr. Bolter. Nice to see you. And I'm now going to move on to agenda item 9, which is the Environment Performance Report to December 2021, as set out on pages 313 to 328. Now, Anne's going to take us through this, and you will tell us which performance indicators this report deals with. Anne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good afternoon. As you've just alluded to, out of the 29 indicators, 12 have been updated this time. So I will be focusing my attention on the 12 that have been updated. The reason for that is many of the indicators are annual indicators, or even longer before we get the data, so they haven't therefore been updated at this quarter. And as the Chair said, that's to the end of December 2021. If it's in summary, the snapshot can be seen at Appendix B. You might find that helpful, therefore, to refer to that. Firstly, if I look at the green economy indicators, 3 have been updated under that, and all have seen improvements. The first is on electric vehicle charging locations by 100,000 population, and that's risen from 29 to 32. And on the previous quarter's data, that's 10% increase. But when you compare it to the previous year, same time the previous year, it's 60% increase. So while we still have a long way to go in this area, I'm sure you agree it's positive momentum, and we are beginning to see, that momentum really build. And with that, we've moved up to the second quartile for that indicator. EV ownerships also improved, and that's measured per 100,000 population, and that's gone from 68 to 77 over the last quarter. It's still, however, in the third quarter, so again, we have a lot to do in that area. But for context, the latest general car ownership information is 5,440 cars per 10,000 population. So that's comparing to 77 per 10,000 as EV type vehicle. That's equivalent to 1.4% of the car fleet. So it does show you on a whole there's a long way to go on that, but I'm sure you'll appreciate we really are beginning to see momentum in that area. Moving on to nitrogen dioxide exceedances, they've declined. They've gone from 3 to 2 in 2020. That's that data period there. Pandemic is likely to have had an effect on that. I would say, however, both exceedances are in Northwest Leicestershire district area. The district council itself is responsible for air quality monitoring and analysis of that, and they do produce annual reports on that. However, there's likely to be a number of factors behind this position. The level of quarrying in the district, significant number of properties that are off the gas grid, and so using oil for heating or open fires even, as well as the major road network through the district area. They're all probably likely to be factors in that position, but as I say, there has been an improvement. If I move on to the well-being indicators, there's been an improvement with the PM 2.5 particulate matter, which is reduced, and you'll see the figures there in the dashboard at page 324. We are still, however, in the third quartile for that. The next area we have updates in this quarter is under the Great Communities objective, strategic objective, and 6 indicators have been updated, 3 seeing a change in position. The first of those is the total household waste per household, and performance has seen a slight decline, moving from just over 1,020 kilograms per household to 1,043, and that remains in the third quarter. That data is to June 2021, so we think about it in relation to the pandemic, it's likely to be impacted by that. And I think, as we all acknowledge, there was different patterns and waste there. More of us were home, more of us were getting home deliveries. There's different, waste materials, different quantities coming through different outlets. So again, I think, that is going to be impacted by where we were at a point in time. Fly tipping, we've talked about fly tipping already in this meeting. The incidents per 1,000 population have increased from 5.5 to 8.6 during 2021 financial year. And, as we did touch on in our earlier conversation, factors around that are complex, and I think we are all in agreement. Enforcement is a key element around that as well. We are, however, in the second quartile for that. So while we all acknowledge, there is more to be done, and particularly in the last item, feedback into the strategy that maybe fly tipping needs to be recognised, it needs to be strengthened, references to it need to be strengthened. As I say, we are still in the second quartile there. And last, under that Great Communities outcome, and a more positive note, the survey that we regularly carry out of 1,600 respondents and whether the council should do more to help protect the environment, the figures reduced, inferring that more people think, we are doing a reasonable job, a good job in this respect. If I just move us on to affordable and quality homes outcome, page 326 on the dashboard, you'll see that we've seen a slight improvement in the percentage of domestic properties with energy performance certificates 3+. And this relates to existing homes. It's just a reminder, so it's a retrofit element, but it does, it is just a slight increase. So it does demonstrate the challenge of that retrofit, the whole enormity of the task there. However, it is positive. We are seeing it going in the right direction. There's been no updates on that final outcome, the strategic outcome corporate enablers at this point in time. So I will stop there in case there's any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Now, I'm just wondering if, for the sake of clarity, members would like to start on page 315 and take us through that in a logical form as Anne has taken us through. So I'm looking for EV charges and ownership and any comments or otherwise that people may wish to make, and then failing that I'll move on. Okay, Mrs. Hack.
Obviously, part of the EV switching is to reduce carbon. Do we monitor the transition to hybrids? Because obviously that will also have a positive contribution to reducing carbon overall. So do we know what that picture looks like?
The short answer to that is no, we don't specifically monitor that. The indicator and the data collected is around that EV vehicles themselves, you know, not the hybrid ones. However, the outcome and the impact of that will be, because in terms of the emissions data, that's as a whole. So it will take that as part of the factors contributing to that.
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, yes. Electric charging vehicles. One of the stumbling blocks is people who live in terraced properties unable to charge their vehicles because of their locations. We were talking some time ago about the possibility of some covers for cables across pavements, and that might encourage more people to use electric vehicles if that's a possibility. But how far have we got that as far as the county is concerned? Are we going to allow that, not going to allow it, or what? The danger then, of course, is people with caravans could then start charging them as well. So how are we going to manage that situation?
I think if I may say, Mr. Bolter, certainly if we look at the urban environment, we're noticing that lots of lampposts charging points are being allowed and the likes, but I don't know how that impacts us here, but I'll go to Anne.
Last time we asked that, Chair, the director said that we weren't allowed lamppost connections, so I don't know how we're going with that one now.
Well, I'll let the director answer that if you would like, Mr. Bolt.
In short answer to the charging off lighting columns, that's not something we're pursuing at the moment. We are looking at a procedure with regard to cables, etc. So people being able to charge from their home. That is the last time we talked about that. I think is if I recall correctly, was in the January meeting. So just over a month ago now. And what we're doing is part of our we're updating our highway design guide, and that's part of that. So we're looking at experience elsewhere as to the best way going forward, but one of the options was, you know, that matting over cables, etc. I think the other thing, and I think we did mention it again before, is we have to keep in mind, you know, how things like the big energy companies are looking to provide charging. If there's rapid charging at what will become eventually redundant petrol stations, you know, they will come to other uses. We need to think about that and therefore augment and make sure that we are not going down a route that, you know, because other technologies move on, make it obsolete in the short term. So we are looking at the moment at our policy and procedure, and that's been wrapped up in our highway design guide. So we hopefully over the next few months we will have a clear position on the way forward and respond to those requests we get into the authority for charging in those areas where it's difficult, such as terraced housing.
Well, will people have to apply to the county for permission to put these cables in, or they will? Yeah, okay, thank you. Won't be a charge for that, will there?
Of course, what we will do as well is look at supermarket charging points and so on and so forth. There are lots of opportunities in this commercial regime where there will be other alternatives for those unfortunate enough not to have a parking space dedicated that they can get an easy wire to and from. But there we are. Right, any further questions on electric vehicles in general? Okay.
Thank you. Personally, I feel we are a little bit too narrow-minded, and there will be other technologies which probably will come on stream, because I find some of my residents who can't afford them, and even if they can't, then if the battery goes wrong, then they can't afford the battery, and they're also having to pay double in their insurance. But never mind that. We at Harbour are looking at electric charging points in rural areas, and we are finding it very difficult because there are the logistics that are surrounding rural charging points as well. And even with the houses, the electricity points aren't necessarily there, or the infrastructure can't cope with it. And so my point really is, Are we too focused on just one form of alternatives? Should we not focus also on other alternatives that might come on stream and encouraging that as well alongside? And my other question is page 323, and there are the two indicators at the bottom on Leicestershire Rivers. There are two indicators and we do not have any performance. And I wonder why we've got them there if we haven't got any data, and how could we monitor that? How could we get any data? Could you talk me through it before I make up my mind what I want to say next? Thank you.
Mrs. Page, hold that. I'm not going to let the officer do that now. I'm going to continue to go through the thing in order as I've said, and then at the end I'll bring in that particular point about water quality. Okay, so anything further on electric vehicles? And moving on then to...
Wasn't answered, Chairman. I was asking and...
lead member, go ahead.
No, sorry, Chairman, just specifically on your electric vehicle point and about this authority, if you like, putting all our eggs in one basket. I don't, in all honesty, think that's the case. I think from what I perceive as lead member, we're taking a technology neutral position. I think the market at the moment is tending to lean towards electric vehicles, but no one doubts, not least me and certainly the well qualified officers that conduct our business. There are other forms of technology. I mean, I'm a vehicle enthusiast in the sense that I just like the wheels. I don't really care what propels the vehicle, whether it's a battery or a combustion engine, but I follow the motoring press as it is at the moment. And I made a statement in full council about our own vehicles in the highways department. There's about 400 of them, and we're going to hydro treated oil fuels on those those vehicles. And then of course there are hybrids, as Amanda's just spoken about. There's electric vehicles, there's biofuel potentially being talked about as a potential fuel or energy source for the running of engines moving forward. So I don't think we're wedded to any particular type of vehicle, but of course as a public authority responsible for the highways, etc., we have to have pragmatic, if like, working processes and solutions for all types of technology that consumers might engage with. So I think that's where we are at the moment, but we're certainly not wedded to electric vehicles in particular.
Are you happy with that? That's okay. Thank you, lead member. That's super. Moving on then to air quality in general, which of course will be a byproduct and improving, we hope, byproduct of what we've just been discussing. Any questions on that at the moment? It is of course the district partners who monitor that for us. Okay. And then into any other items now which you want to bring in. Members. So there are no further questions in this, Mrs. Hagg.
Sorry, I mean, just to forward on from Rosita's point, if I may, because obviously water is something that's in one of the supplementary papers for the previous item, which did indicate that the water quality of our rivers hasn't improved since 2016, and the 2020 position is exactly the same. And there's this target to get to 100% of quality by 2027. And I suppose because there's no data in the paper, is how close are we going to get there, and what I mean. Decisions in Parliament haven't helped, but actually, if you look at the storm overflows and the data that is starting to appear about the amount of sewage that is going into the waterways, it's increasing, and it's increased significantly across Leicestershire. And I don't think that that's something that, whilst it's not our responsibility technically, and I do get that, it's on our KPI. So I think it's an important one for us to make sure that we are measuring it, and we bring those responsible to this scrutiny, if I may, Chair, to make sure that they answer for their performance.
That does follow on from our briefing this morning, Mrs. Hack, and I totally agree with you. I'm happy to accept that and move that. This committee certainly would like to have the Environment Agency, which is charged nationally with the responsibility of monitoring sewage outfalls and other outfalls into the watercourses, to explain how they do that and what mechanisms they have in place to monitor effectively our Leicestershire watercourses. And I think with that focus, I would be quite delighted to do that. Lead member.
Just to add to what you've just said, Chairman, you might want to extend an invitation to possibly Severn Trent and Anglian Water as well to accompany the Environment Agency. I'm not sure how feasible that is, but it might be an opportunity to ask officers to explore that, because it'd be very interesting to hear what both organisations have to say about this issue.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. With my Scrutiny Commissioner's hat on, I think I'd be quite willing to put that on the agenda if we can put that in as a recommendation from this committee. However, I think what we've got to be quite clear of, because we did have them before and they did come and they were very willing to come, but they wanted clear terms of reference. So what are we actually going to ask? So we have to provide them with a set of questions, i.e. how do you monitor it or whatever. And I think at the time they accepted, I think about 5 or so, I can't remember, 5 or 7. So we've got to be quite clear. We've got to put the questions to them first. And so if we can do that in conjunctions with the officers, I think it would actually be brilliant to see how they monitor and what they're going to do going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. I'm absolutely delighted with your response there. I'm going to hand over now to Anne to get out of that one. I'm joking.
Thank you very much, Chair. And in answer to Mrs. Page's earlier question, the reason that there's no data on those 2 indicators there on that page 323 is we haven't had any updates. There's been no new data coming from the Environment Agency. We are, however, expecting it in the next 6 months. So I would suggest, if the committee's happy, that we set our questions in relation to that data, and once that's out, then we have that. We invite them along to the committee to really have an understanding of the latest position, and then the questions arising from that and have the discussion around that may well make sense and make a useful conversation for the committee.
Thank you, Anne, for that. Could we arrange for that time to converge with the invite? So, is that what you were saying? No.
Apologies, okay. That's what I was being inarticulate about, Chair.
No, it's me. Sometimes I don't quite catch what exactly the people are saying, but yeah, good. So we're both going to make sure that the figures arrive as an item and the EA arrive as an item. Excellent. Sure, members will be comfortable
Chair,
with that.
Can we
1 minute, Mrs. Page.
Chair, can we just go around and just agree some of the questions in general, what this committee would like to see, so we go away with that on the recommendation? I mean, Councillor Hack has got some ideas and I seem to agree, how is it, what are they doing to monitor it? Some very basic stuff.
Thank you. Right, Mrs. Page, we are having a discussion on how to handle that at the moment, and you've heard some items already, or points already articulated here. The officers will circulate each individual member of this committee with a questionnaire or an opportunity to speak, and if you would then put those down, they will synthesize those and put them together for the invite to the Environment Agency, and maybe also, as the lead member said, Severn Trent and Anglian Water was the other one.
I'm not sure who covers the whole of Leicestershire, but right, it could be Anglian Water.
It is Severn Trent and Anglian Water.
But Anglian is only a small part, but there we go. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Right. Any further points on this? Mr. Bolter.
So going back slightly, on page 317, item 24, we're talking about delivering our waste to an alternative point. Is that going forward successfully now, so that this indicator goes into the top quartile rather than the fourth quartile?
I'm going to let Anne deal with that one.
I was just going to pass it to Joe, the Assistant Director Chair. Thank you.
Joe, I see you smiling there in anticipation. There we go. Joanna.
Thank you. I was just going to put my camera off, Chair. The short answer is, I think we've mentioned to this committee, or certainly sort of a substantive previous entity, the fact that the County Council's in a major procurement for residual waste, which is just part of our business as usual. Contracts come to an end. Yes, they do tend to have a really long period of longevity. You know, they can be anything up to 25 years. The county's ambition is still to enter into a contract that is, to all intent and purposes, non-landfill in nature. We've already got a number of them already in place. We're still in a slightly challenging legal place, so I've got to be really cautious about what I say, but we are substantively through that procurement, and at some point I'll be able to answer that in a less cryptic way, but the ambition is still to be able to finalise that procurement, and it will be for non-landfill, which, if that all comes to pass, will move us significantly once it starts to operate to our ambition is to be certainly way before the national target, which I think is less than 5% to landfill by 2035. We're trying to be 10 years ahead of that. Thank you.
Are you comfortable with that, Mr. Bolter?
Interesting answer, Chair.
Right. Okay. Any further points, Mrs. Hack?
Sorry, just on that actual point is clearly in the previous document, we do say we're going to get to 5% by 2025. We're at 28. And I suppose for me is, what's the trajectory of that? Are we confident that it's going to go from 28 to 25 in a really short space of time, and how that's going to be managed?
Again, yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. The County Council has a live procurement ongoing. That if I gave you the suggestion that if 60,000 plus tonnes of waste moves from what is increasingly going to landfill but goes to thermal treatment or incineration, but an alternative up the waste hierarchy to landfill, at the point that starts to take full effect, you have a step change. So if at the moment our target, our pre-existing target is to have less than 30% going to landfill, we're achieving that, but we want to move towards the new resources and waste strategy target. Now, the national target is to be less than 5% by 2035. You're correct that in the documentation it talks about an ambition to be there by 2025-26. This procurement, when it's resolved, should allow for that step change when it's fully utilised and that tonnage is going through that contract.
Thank you. What a superb answer. That's comforting. Lovely. Right, members. Anything further then on the KPIs? No. Right, well, can I thank you for your debate of the two substantive items that we've dealt with today, and move then on to agenda item 10, which is to advise of any other items which I've decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. And as I said before, there are no such urgent items to discuss, which finally brings us to agenda item 11, which is the date of the next meeting. And I think you probably already have got it diaried as Tuesday, the 14th of June, 2022 at 2 p.m. And with that, can I thank you for your attendance and super debate and suggestions. Thank you.